Welcome to the first episode of Chaos Creation Miniatures. We're going to breathe some life into some of these miniatures with vibrant colors and how I go about detailing and weathering all of my models. So whether you're a seasoned painter, you're just starting your journey, I'm going to share what I've learned in my time painting to help capture the essence of these tabletop universes. Hopefully you learned something along the way, and if anything, maybe you can teach me something as well. In my first video, we're going to dive into the iconic Ghazghkull Thrakka. He's one of my favorite models from Warhammer. Join me as I break down the painting process step by step. From base coating to the final highlights, we'll share my tips on how to achieve those striking colors, the weathering effects, and what makes Ghazghkull Thrakka really pop on the tabletop. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bells. Chaos Creation Miniatures. I started this as a repaint. I had it done a few years ago and needed to be shown some love, so I reprimed the model and I applied a zenithal highlight over it. So that's what we're going to start here today. Once it dried, I started laying down a layer of fluorescent magenta. This is my first video, so some of the centering might be off. I'm sure it's going to get better over time. Tackling the start of the claws, I painted the accent parts that were going to be painted blue, and I apply a few base coats to make a solid bright base. So once everything was painted white, I applied a bright yellow Imperial Fist, contrast to the tips, and I start to work my way up from the tip of the claws to the knuckles. I go about a third of the way up and quickly switch over to the Magma Droth Flame. It's a contrast paint from Games Workshop. It has, and I do this before it has the chance to dry. This allows for a wet blend for the contrast. It makes it easier to get a smooth transition for those colors. I do the same thing for the higher part of the claws with a Doomfire Magenta contrast, all the way up to the knuckles of the gauntlet. I attempt to paint the accent color on all the trim. I had painted white, but the contrast wasn't working well with the large panels in blue. So I ended up painting over it with another blue later in the paint job. Contrasts tend to pool weird on large mechanical or flat surfaces. And it makes painting tanks with a brush a little more complicated process. I take out the airbrush again, and to help push the brightness of the claws on the tip, I just lightly hit the tips of the claws. I then go into the edge highlighting with a yellow to create a line of contrast to help shape the claws and add more saturation to the airbrushed areas that the white pushed back. starting to really tackle the magenta, I had very little idea of how I wanted to highlight this without making the armor too pink. So I decided to push the saturation back a little bit by mixing some ice yellow into the magenta used in the base coat. Using this softer pink, I try to do a rough blend and target all of the raised edges and the highest points of the minis. This is the widest section of this color for the blend. It's going to be more refined as it goes on, so this is a little bit of a loose edge highlight. After this, I decided to start the base colors on the metal parts. I am not the best at near metallic metals, but I think I've come up with a way to do a mock metallic effect that's pretty okay. The idea is pretty standard. I apply the darkest gray that I'm using over most of the black undercoat, and each shade of gray you add, make sure to cover less and less of the previous coat, keeping in mind where you want that light source to be coming from, all the way up to a near white. targeting the soft edge highlights of the blue, this is where I realized I didn't like the way that the contrast dried and decided to put it off until I finished more highlighting in the magenta, adding more and more icy yellow to brighten up and reduce the amount that I apply to not cover up each previous layer of color. Don't judge the brushes I use. I bought a pack of cheap brushes a long time ago and I'm still working through them all. One day I'm going to invest in some better brushes. As I get higher and higher in the highlight, it looks more and more yellow, and while it isn't a traditional color for highlighting magenta, I was really happy with how it was developing, so I kept moving forward with it. It made it a little bit of a different look than other models I'd seen. Remember, don't be a slave to your model. Manipulate it, twist it, turn it around, flip it upside down, whatever you need to do to get a better angle to reach where your brush is needed, and how to capture the right highlights and edges of your model. The skulls hanging from his chest and the monster skull at the top. After being painted white, I apply a healthy coat of skeleton horde contrast. I then went in with wraith bone and titanium white to build up those highlights higher and higher, but it seems I did not have my camera recording, and I promise you this won't be the last time that happens. I'm sure. The bronze is going to be tackled the same way the rest of the metals are, but instead of gray, we're going to be using browns and oranges. So I start off with a burnt sienna, and I slowly mix more and more of the fire dragon orange that I have. Then for the highest highlight, I mix in more of that ice yellow to show the high contrast for the attempt at doing a bronze color. Now, this is the part where I finally address the blue. So I repainted all of the blue panels with a healthy amount of Ahriman's blue. This is then edge highlighted with a mix of Ahriman blue with Vallejo's sky blue touched in, just a little bit of a mix. Using a hatching style of highlighting, I add a scratchier look, and I lean into that comic book effect, which I often lean on with my miniatures. Again, adding more and more of that sky blue to the original mix to create more sections of interest and bringing places that can direct the eye around the model. One of the final sections that I had fun experimenting on was with the cannon barrels. So here I dry brushed the barrels white, then applied the same yellow used on the claws. Once dried, I then again dry brushed on a layer of orange, and then magenta, again using less and less amounts on the brush each time, so you still see the undercoats of all the previous colors. And then I applied a little bit of black to the magenta to separate the heated section from the actual gun itself. After removing the mask from the face, I had repainted only the metal skull cap because it was originally done in true metallics. I wanted to keep that non-metallic metal going. So this was handled the same way as the earlier metal was done. So adding a lighter and lighter amount of grays until I'm reaching an edge highlight with the brightest color. Then paint the eye with a bright titanium white along with the eye or light thing on the side of his head. Not quite sure what it is, just painted it the same color. Then using some Troll Slayer orange and a touch of Flash Gitz yellow as the highlight of the electronic eye. That is the last real step that I had done before basing it, and at the end of it, this is what it's going to leave us. So I'm happy with how this turned out, and keep an eye out for our next video where we're gonna hopefully have it up soon before the end of October. Thanks for sticking around, and we'll see you next time.